Missouri, so about 20 miles south now of Centerville. He passed himself off in the community as a very successful businessman and real estate owner. He drove a Model A around the community. He found a girl in a nearby farmhouse where he'd go to play with cards and all the rest. And he and Bonnie Porter came to Centerville many, many times. He took her to a tumbler to buy whole outfits of clothes. And Fred Burke, who's now calling himself Richard F. White. So Colbeck, I'm not sure, I'm lost myself, from Colbeck to Jack Burke, to Fred Burke, to Fred Dane, and now Richard F. White. He walks into this courthouse. He takes out a marriage certificate under an assumed name with 4 photographs of himself on the wall. And the photograph said $101,000 on his head. This is the most dangerous man in America. And he took the girl that he got the certificate with. They picked up 2 people in the town, see if I can remember their names. One was Ethel Swanson. And they went to the Lutheran minister's home on East Walsh Street, and he performed a marriage ceremony. Now, Fred Burke, you're probably wondering what happened next. Well, somebody that wasn't fooled was Joseph Hunsaker. He was a man running a Shell gas station in Green City. Now, he was fascinated by detective stories. He had read every detective magazine on the market, and he'd read about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and he'd seen pictures by this time of the suspicion, which was Fred Burke with all these different names. What he did then was started watching very carefully Fred Burke. Fred Burke came into the station and said, "I'd like 4 new wheels on my Model A." And Hunsaker thought, 1930, nobody can afford 4 wheels. They were all coming in asking for 1 wheel, and then another wheel, and then they spaced the wheels apart. So he wrote to the Department of Justice. He didn't trust anybody knowing the story. There was one man in the town he did trust, called Alan Morrison, and the 2 of them agreed to keep it secret. And he wrote to the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and said, "I think we've got Fred Burke. He's had plastic surgery on his nose, but I'm pretty sure it's the same person." The Justice Department wrote back and said, "If you think that is Fred Burke, don't have anything, attempt to take him, because he's an incredibly dangerous man. Go to the police at St. Joseph." Well, the Justice Department meant St. Joseph, Michigan. Hunsaker thought he meant in Missouri, St. Joseph. So over he goes and tells the police. They get FBI officers, they track where the house is, and in the middle of the night, they break into the house where Fred Burke is living with his wife, Bonnie. And when Fred Burke just woke up and he tried to grab a gun, police were too quick for him. And Fred Burke said, "Are you the gang?" And the police said, "No, we're the law." They arrested him. They took him to St. Joseph, Missouri, where he was charged. He was extradited to St. Joseph, Michigan, where he stood trial. Nobody ever stood trial for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He stood trial for the policeman that he killed in St. Joseph, Michigan. He was put in Marquette State Penitentiary, and he stayed there until he died in 1940, a model patient, so they say. And Bonnie said, "I knew nothing about it." Well, I drove along the road where he lived between Lemons and Green City. It's beautiful in the fall. Everybody ought to go because it's so gorgeous. And I looked to see which of the houses along there looked as though they would have existed in the 1920s, and I took a deep breath and I knocked on the door of the one in the middle. And a woman came to the door and I said, "Is there anybody here that knows anything about Fred Burke?" She said, "Just a minute." She goes into her back room and she comes back and she says, "My aunt says you're to come in." I went in and there was Mrs. Gladys Peak. She was a teacher. She'd been a teacher. She was in her 90s. She was almost completely deaf, completely blind. We were screaming at each other, but her brain was as clear as I could be. And I said, know anything about Fred Burke? Oh yeah, she said. I remember Fred Burke. She said, when we'd all get together as a group round here to play cards or whatever, the first thing he'd do is put a child on his lap. The smaller the child, the better. So I said, did you have doubt? No, she said. A lot of people did, but we all kept quiet. Now, we thought he might be a really bad criminal, but murderer. You know, we completely ruled out. Other people have given me their own accounts down there. One woman's turned to our friend and she said, that guy's a crook. Look at the way he keeps looking all over the place. You can't fool some of those people, you know, when they're so basic. Well, that's Mr. Fred Burke. Died a natural death in Marquette State Penitentiary. Now, by the 1930s, there was a geographic switch. The murders were no longer really centered around Chicago. They were moving to Kansas City. So through the 1930s, there were sightings of several of the major gangs in this town. Machine Gun Kelly, a lot of people said they'd seen him right on Seminole Square. John Dillinger was supposed to have come here, and other people said, oh, we don't think it was really John Dillinger, something that looked like him, but it was enough to make the people at the armory nervous, and they removed all the hammers off the guns. Now, the person we got solid information was in this town was Pretty Boy Floyd. Pretty Boy Floyd had relatives down in Cincinnati. He went to visit them repeatedly. He was seen in the Bluebird Cafe by more than one person. And furthermore, we know that a car was found burning. This was a sort of a thing that they did, these gangs, they try to destroy their cars. And it was burning just about a mile east of Numa. And when the police turned up, and the FBI and the state agents turned up, they said that car belonged to Pretty Boy Floyd. But I think one of the big excitements in this area was the night the Wayne County Police called the Appanoose County Police and said, we got him, Bonnie and Clyde. We'd seen him go right through that town after the shootout at Dexter in Iowa. And they said they're heading straight east on Highway 2. You lot head west and we'll get him. They didn't get him. And the assumption is that Bonnie and Clyde had turned north into Plano. Several of you here from Plano. We know that a farmhouse store was broken into in Plano. And a lot of things taken in the way of food and money, which was almost certainly Bonnie and Clyde. And their car was burned north of Mystic. And apparently what Bonnie and Clyde did was they took all the back roads and the side roads before they wind up down in Texas where they meet their end. Well, by the early 1920s, with all the crime going on in this town, the people had enough. They said, we're going to have to do something. People said, well, what are we going to do? Well, over at Moravia, there was a bank robbery. And the people at Moravia started putting guns behind